And then I may, as my wife's not here yet, I may make Cyril, I may make you a co-host. You've done a lot of Zoom meetings before, haven't you? Just in case we have people shouting at their children, then it means you can mute them as well. Um,
Yes, Peter, sure. Thank you.
okay, and then I'll just make sure I've got all of the necessary rights set up on here. Yeah, that's good. That's set up. Great. Let me share my screen. Once I've got the, okay, let me just find that again. It's just slipped out. There we go. Okay. Great. I'm just checking that you can all see that. Okay. Well, it's great to have you online, and I'm sure there'll be a few more joining us as well. And so let me give a little bit of an overview of where we're going before we open in prayer. So we realize in church life that very often we ask people a lot, we've got the building project as a church, there's a lot of needs, but we realize that there's very seldom do we actually help people think about managing money. And so the heart of this is to help you. And so what we are going to be doing is we're going to be looking at 5 topics in the next hour and a half. We're going to be looking at stewardship, budgeting perspectives, planning for the future, top tips for managing money in Geneva, and then faith and finance. And we are blessed to have a host of different stars who are helping out. So Kerry is going to be helping speak on budgeting perspectives with his risk analyst background. Mark Green is going to be speaking on planning for the future, and from Medtronic, and Cyril, his banking background, is going to be on top tips for managing money in Geneva. So let me open us in prayer, and let's ask the Lord's help as we look at these things. Father, we do thank you for each and every person who is on this call, Lord, and you know their financial situation. You know whether they are in a big hole with many problems, or whether actually you currently are providing them with all that they need. And so, Father, we do ask now as we come to this session that for whatever situation people may be in, maybe they've just started out on married life, maybe they're looking to buy a first home, that you would lead, guide, and direct. And I thank you for Mark and Cyril and Kerry, and for the time they've invested in preparing, and for what they'll be sharing as well. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, it wouldn't be possible to do a church meeting without a little bit of information from the pastors. So I want to kick off by talking a little bit about the whole area of stewardship. Because that's a big word, but actually, in one sense, this is at the heart of what we're thinking about. And I love this quote from Luther, because it says there are 3 conversions necessary. The conversion of the heart, that sense of when we come to Christ. Secondly, the conversion of the mind, how we can start thinking Christ-centeredly. And then thirdly, he says, and the purse, which is often the last and the longest to happen. So often it's the heart, the mind, and then eventually the purse. And in one sense, it starts from the beginning, because it goes back to the heart of who is the owner. In John 1:3, it says, through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made. And then in Psalm 24, it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And I know for me, even after becoming a believer, I still had the view that actually I was the owner of my possessions, my wealth. And so there was a big fight that really didn't take place until almost 10 years into my Christian life. Whereas I thought, well, I'm the owner of these things. And if I'm the owner, then I can choose to do what I want with them. Whereas the biblical perspective is actually we are called to be stewards. We're called to be managers of all of the things that God has blessed them with. And again, in Genesis, it said, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And so already at the start of creation, you can see how God is the creator and owner of everything. And yet he calls us to steward these things. And it's whenever we think, okay, we're the ones in charge, that's always when everything goes wrong. And so the first point in stewardship is always understanding he is the owner and I'm the steward. I'm called to manage his resources. And again, it goes back to the heart of, who gave you that? As you look around your home, your bank balance, your possessions, who gave you that? And in Deuteronomy, there's this chilling verse because it's a reminder that they clearly were slaves in Egypt, but they'd been bought out of Egypt and they'd been were about to be placed in the promised land. And Moses gives them this sermon and he reminds them, when you have eaten, when you are satisfied, praise the Lord your God. And here's the warning, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. There's a lot of my's there. My power, my hands, for me. But remember, the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. And so, again, it's very easy as we go through life to have and especially in in Geneva, to have a my-centered view of everything, rather than forgetting actually that it's God who gives us the ability to produce wealth, to manage wealth, and to look after these things. And if we go back to, back to Genesis, God had given this good creation to be stewarded well, to be managed well. But then we know that how that serpent got in and whispered in Eve's ear. And we see that despite the fact that God had given such abundance, it says the woman saw the fruit of the tree, which he said, you're not to eat from, was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. And so she took some and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And so even though God had given her everything that she needed, there was still that essence of greed, that believing the lie that more was needed, that God couldn't be trusted as the owner. And so she thought, well, let me take ownership in my own hands. Let me do it my way. And we see how greed crept in. And what's fascinating is if we go all the way into the Gospels, when we see Jesus's first encounter with the devil, we see exactly the same temptation of greed comes in once again. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I'll give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. And Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And what's fascinating here is, again, what the enemy tries to do is he tries to persuade Jesus, you can have all these things. You can be the owner of all these things. And he even tries to persuade him that, that I'm actually owning them as well, forgetting that it's God who's the owner of everything. And again, what does Jesus do? He says, no, I'm called to worship the Lord my God and serve him only with all the resources I've been given me. I'm not believing the lie, and I'm not going to pursue greed, but rather I'm going to pursue worship and to serve him with the resources that he's given me. And in that sense, when we come to think about this matter of stewardship, it's actually a matter of love. In 1 Timothy, it says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And let me tell you, um, even before I became a believer at the age of 17, I loved money. And actually, even very early into my Christian walk, I loved making money. And yet it says the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Why? Because actually we're called to be people who love God and heed his voice. And again, even in Geneva, we know there is a lot of money. And it says some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And actually, we know that the more there is to manage, and the more there is to worry about. Many of my most wealthy friends who are not believers are the ones that worry most. And so in that sense, stewardship is not just about being a manager. It's a matter of love and who we love and how we love, and whether we're going to love the resources or actually God, who is the one that has given us these resources. And so again, Pastor Neil in the sermon this morning was talking a little bit about the old economy and the new economy. And so when we talk about stewardship, we need to again think about that in terms of what it means in the new covenant. So again, if we look at the old covenant versus the new covenant, it's helpful to think about this. What does this mean in terms of stewardship? Well, in the old covenant, you could only enter into God's presence once a year by the high priest. And now in the new covenant, well, every day by everyone can enter into God's presence. In the old covenant, when we think about sacrifices, they were continually made again and again because they were imperfect. Now in the new covenant, we know that the sacrifice of Jesus covers all things. Old covenant, only certain types of food could be taken. New covenant, well, get up and eat. Everything is available. Again, in the old covenant, when you think about the area of the Spirit, it was reserved for certain people in certain places. Now in the new covenant, we see that the Spirit is open to all in every place. So again, when we come to the old covenant, what do we see? Well, we see the principle of the tithe. Well, what about the new covenant? And so I know one of my biggest struggles when it came to stewardship was, one, acknowledging everything was God's, but then two, realizing I'm called to be responsive to the Holy Spirit, and then to work through, okay, if this is the old covenant and the new covenant is generous in so many other ways, well, what does that mean for my stewardship of my money? And that's
God's money.
Of God's money. Thank you, my wife. And so again, whenever anyone asks, I would say, this is my base. If everything's been more generous in the new covenant, this is my base. Not because it's the law, but because of the generosity of Jesus to me. And so the key thing to take away is it's all God's. The temptation is always going to be there for greed. We have to be careful that we don't love the resources, but our love is focused on God and Jesus. And we need to remember that in our stewardship, we are called to be new covenant stewards, which is always a more generous covenant through what Jesus has done. And that is my last slide. And I'd now like to hand over to Kerry. And again, if you've got any questions as we go through, do feel free to put them into the chat as we wander through. But I'm going to hand over to Kerry now so he can talk on budgeting perspectives. Kerry, I'm very happy to advance the slides for you if that's going to be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Pastor James. Welcome to everybody. And just wanted to use the opportunity to give you just a little background. I worked over the many years in the areas of accounting, finance, and risk management. In my previous life, I was a banker. And so I had the awesome responsibility of seeing how money was handled and abused by the very rich and the very poor. This afternoon, I was going to share our perspective as my wife and I, and she will join from time to time to provide a little more details to furnish you some insights, which I hope will give you some ideas as how you can approach budgeting. I'm married And from that, I carry a particular perspective. I'm a Christian, I love the Lord, and I believe what He has given to me is lent to me. And therefore, I have to give an account of for what time, resources He has given to me. And so my perspective is shaped primarily by those factors mentioned above. I come from a big family. I had 2 uncles and 7 aunts, and from a very poor family, and budgeting was essential to survive. We didn't have, well, according to my mother, enough that we can splurge and do as we feel. We had to be careful and we had to be meticulous in monitoring what little resources we had. I came to Geneva by way of my wife. I'm a trailing spouse, or to the term, I don't quite know the meaning of that, but I came as the partner in this relationship to provide support in this new working environment for her. And therefore, I was given the responsibility or the mandate more to manage the finance while she was out earning it. I was not the source of a regular flow of income, but I was responsible for managing it. And that process is a stressful one and one which I had to give an account at the end of each year when we met to decide whether we perform according to plan. I bring up a sort of risk perspective to budgeting. If you accept the world what we live in, what we are currently living in, is one filled with uncertainties. You have feast, famine, you have bust, you have booms. And also, in the midst of all that, sin has distorted our values. And therefore, it affects our spending pattern and how we view ourselves. And therefore, the first point I want to us to spend a moment to think about who we are. We are here in Geneva, where we are from, because that also shapes our values and how we spend and handle money. It also helps us to shape our spending rules, whether it be that the money is ours, and therefore we can do as we feel. If we have a desire for electronics, we can go ahead and purchase as much as we want without considering the needs of those around us or what the Lord brought us here for. Also, when do we budget? Is it at the beginning of the month, end of the month, end of the year? All these shape the budget, the way how we go about budgeting. For us, that's Sean and I, we came to Geneva on July the 1st, no, July the 7th, 2012. And it was a Sunday. And I remember us and work, she started to work on the Monday. And therefore it was my responsibility to be up and down Geneva, find items, whether it was an iron board or the router for the wireless, etc., etc. And from that experience, I was able to bring to the table when we were ready to make our first budget, what would we consider as priority, the important items and those we're going to consider frills. First of all, what we consider as the governing principle of our budgeting process. We are stewards. We deeply believe that we are stewards. This money was lent to us. This money was lent to us, and therefore, at the end of our stay on earth, we have to give an account of it. We're going to give account of our time. We have to give an account of our talents. And we're going to give account of the resources that are available to us. The budget itself is the back end of a process. the process for us, yes, the process for us was the examination of the year, the past year. And in that process, we'd examine things like our stewardship in terms of our devotional life, how much time was spent in the word, how much time was spent in praying, how much time was spent in doing ministry. We also had to, we did an examination of the physical aspects of our lives, how much exercise we did, how much time was spent visiting others, etc., etc. Just to give you a brief summary of that. And then the budget came after. The budget was a declaration of our intent for the current year, for all this ensuing the ensuing year. And that budget was shaped by the plans we crafted out of that review. The budget was also shaped by our values. Sean and I, we are from Jamaica, and we are painfully aware of the impact of debt. And therefore, from the beginning, we declared that we will have no credit card debt. Therefore, we operate strictly on a cash basis. For many, this is difficult, but with God's help, it's possible. And simply put, if the credit card cannot be covered each month, then we know that's a vital sign that we are in trouble. What persons may not be aware of is that credit card is an unsecured debt. And because it's an unsecured debt, the banks or the lending agency imposes a penal rate. So you end up paying a much higher rate of interest on a credit card than you would for even a normal unsecured loan. Therefore, if possible, you stay away from it. Or if you must, you have to manage it. Manage it. Keep on top of it, or you'll be buried by it like sin. So the government principle is no debt in our expenditure. There are many perspectives you can use to create your budget. In the bank where I used to work, there was one philosophy that said that at the end of each month when you're paid, you look after yourself first. Therefore, you either splurge or have a sumptuous meal, and anything after that was budgeted. Another view in the bank was life is short, live it up, because tomorrow you don't know if you'll die. Tomorrow will take care of itself. As you'll note, these can be dangerous positions to take. We decided that there are 4 things that we were going to ring fence. And these were savings, or tithes and offering and giving, or obligations, whether to the federal, state, or to the canton. And the third one, which was sort of flexible, the fourth one, which is sort of flexible, would be our food budget. The food budget was derived from our experience, whether initially it would have been composed by trial and error. I, being the one on the ground, would go about looking for deals, we'll look out for specials, we'll look about where we can get things at discount, sign up for factory, not factory, but for my God, miss me there. Sign up for those cards where loyalty cards, yes, loyalty cards. We are given discounts and other offerings. The budget would also the food budget was also informed by, as mentioned before, the review we had done before, how much exercise, what sort of foods you want to eat. And so that will help us to craft the food budget. The budget was done annually. We do an annual budget, and then we had monthly reviews. I must confess that I was tardy in doing the reviews. And at the end of the year, if there's a problem, I got an earful. Another principle we employed is that
recording in progress.
Sorry. Another principle we employed in crafting our budget is that a principle we employ in crafting our budget is saving. It's using savings as a holding area for expenditure that may not be budgeted for that year, but will be expended for in the future. So saving was not necessary to buy a big house or a big car, but was a holding area for emergencies, if it was in the current year, and for big expenditures outside the current year. When the Lord has been good to us, and we have been able to use these principles to live and to see firsthand his blessing on us, because we are of the view, if we give the Lord his portion, the little or what is left, he'll amplify, he'll expand that to achieve his glory through you. And he is not one who slack concerning his promises. In the budget process for us, and just to sum up, to go back a little, so we have ring fence, the tithing, the statutory obligation, savings, food. We initially had a budget for almost all line items: clothing, travel, and it was a nightmare. I sort of asked Sharon to share some of her experience on that exercise.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. And so our budget has evolved over time. As Carrie said, we used to have very detailed line items. We used to keep things in an Excel spreadsheet, and as a part of the end of year review, it became a bit difficult to actually reconcile things, because of course, when you're dealing with a lot of paperwork and everything, it can get a bit complicated to monitor. So over time, we decided that it was more important to keep things simple. And so we moved from that Excel sheet, and the areas that Carrie mentioned earlier that we ring fence, so the tithing, the housing costs, the obligations, the savings, those were the core things that we decided to focus on. And then, because we always knew, we kind of knew in the other big areas what we would spend. After you monitor your expenses for a few years, you kind of have a sense of what transportation is going to be, you know how your food is going to be, you know how you know your habits, you know the things that trigger, you know if you're going to have home leave or you're going to travel, you kind of know a few things. So you kind of do an estimate around those areas, and then we decided to put it in a pot all together, and then use the monitoring to actually try to monitoring of those items on a fairly regular basis to keep ourselves in check. I think one of the things that has blessed us is like an example, it's kind of like a testimony from something that happened this year. We planned one trip to Jamaica this year, and but I ended up traveling 3 times. Well, 2 times both of us, and once I went alone. So that was the one trip that we planned. Things happen, life happens. Kara's mother passed on, so we traveled home for that. My brother got married, which I didn't know at the beginning of the year. We traveled home for that. So of course, the minimum budget, the minimum price to go to Jamaica is like $1,100. So it's like over $2,000, sorry, 2,000 francs for our trip. So that was not budgeted for. So we had to pull from savings. But at the same time, how God worked it out for us is that on a previous trip, the airline compensated us because they were delayed. So we're able to use that to cover one trip totally. And then for the second trip with Kara's mom, we learned that our insurance covers the cost of a ticket for an immediate family death. So it covered it for both of us. That was unexpected. Those two are unexpected inflows. And so those were able to cover the expenses for our travel. So in the end, we only had one trip that we needed to pull from savings. And I believe that, you know, there are times in which sometimes we don't connect the dots in terms of how the Lord brings things in to offset expenses or things that are unexpected. And I think he just did that to show us that we can trust him, and because part of our principle is to ensure that we give, we have our tithing, when I get a bonus, if I get a bonus, then we give out of it. We give regularly to missionaries and so on. So we believe that the Lord decides how much to stretch us, because there are things that are outside of our reach, so we have to wait. But then we also believe that he is the one as our source. He brings things in at the right time. Yes. Is there anything else?
Yes, just to emphasize, and I can't overemphasize the concept that the money is lent to us, and therefore it must be used for the expansion of his kingdom here on earth. Therefore, we have a responsibility to look after those who are less fortunate than us when we have these resources. It's not to squander on ourselves. You know, a principle I've learned quite early. The first job I had was not enough to cover my expenses. And I remember I approached my mother and said to her, "Mumsy, I can't give any tithing. The money, my income is not sufficient to cover bus fare, food." And she said to me, "Carrie, you give me the amount that you want to tithe, and I'll cover everything else, and the rest is history." Because we have applied that principle to our lives, the Lord has been good to us. He has multiplied a little what we have when we give or extend a hand to those who are in need. And I must confess, sometimes I'm annoyed with Charlene, because my wife is very generous. We are walking on the road, and she's willing to give them the house or to invite them home for a meal, which there was no preparation for. But out of that generosity, helping those who are around us, we can help. The Lord will bless us. And so the budget is crafted in such a way that we have made provisions or put ourselves in a position to extend and helping hand to those who are in need. So the budget itself is a declaration of what we intend to do for the year. The savings component is for future expenditure and for emergency. Critical budgeters have no use of work very little on paper unless you have monitoring. It has to be carefully monitored. And therefore, we would have points where we'll examine the budget and see where we are. One component where we pay particular attention is food. The food budget is flexible enough to take into consideration deals and specials. When at the end of the month, we'll look at the budget and say, okay, there's $100 left in the food budget. Therefore, that's all we're going to spend. And it has worked for us. So therefore, at the end of the year, if I'm faithful in doing my job in monitoring, I know that I get a lot of brownie points, so my wife is happy and we are okay. If it's not done properly, you're going to have shortfalls and gaps. And I have to be going around, explain away, why is it this budget is out of whack? Why this expenditure is not in keeping with what we discussed? So in closing, I just want to leave these few points with us. A budget is your intention for the year. Make way for the Lord in it by giving to him what is due unto him. Help those around you. Live as you think he wants you to live. Yes. Enjoy. You can take the role of the great writer in Ecclesiastes. Enjoy the fruits of your labor, but within you enjoy the fruits of your labor, remember those around us. Also, remember, money is a good servant, but a horrible master. And I can see me in private, and I can share countless stories about those who I've encountered in the bank who were very filthy, rotten rich, and are now down in the gutters because they didn't have the proper relationship with money. What you spend is a reflection of what is in your heart. Budgeting is a way to control and manage the financial risk of living, and also an important component of stewardship of the financial resources. And finally, debt can be a trap. You need to have mastery over it. I know it's difficult for many to embrace all these principles, but if you can, I strongly recommend that you do. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. That's brilliant. Kerry, again, I know I was so pleased that when I had a conversation with you, Chanel, because I know that this isn't a topic that many people embark upon. And I know one of the areas we talked about is like, and I think you hinted at that, is initially you started with quite a complex system with 20, many categories, and then you've simplified it down the years to a few. So again, I found that helpful as someone who operates a very similar system with Jane. We have about 25 different categories, and we also have a monthly meeting. But like you said, I think starting simply but having a plan and then making sure there's a monitoring system is so helpful. I'm just going to give a moment to see if we've got any questions at all. Let me just see if there's a question.
At the top.
Yeah, I think that's been replied to, I think, in the chat. Yeah. Any questions for Kerry or Chanel just before we move on to our next section? And we're welcome to have Q&A at the end as well.
Is that
okay? Okay. So, big picture, do you have a plan?
There's a question about food budgeting.
There's a question about food budgeting. Let's see if that's gone in. Food budget. How do you choose the amount? Kerry and Chanel, you want to?
Yes, very good question. As mentioned before, when we came in July, we did a free, well, there was no budget in place because Geneva was new to us, and I was new to the job of shopping around and buying groceries. So what the time was used, about 3 months we used that 3 months initial month, 3 months to experiment, to go around, whether to go to Big Row, Aldi, went across the board to Carrefour, and therefore had a sense of what will keep us each month. And so it's that experience that shaped the first budget, and then we fine-tuned and tweak it over time.
Great. Any more questions at all before we move on? Okay. Okay, let's move on to our next session. And again, the encouragement here is make a budget and then monitor that budget and bring that budget before the Lord. So thank you, Kerry and Chanel. And I know from personal experience that it is so freeing. Even recently, my wife and I, we were looking at our own budget for giving, and she said, let's give to this cause. And my immediate thought was, that's a 3-figure amount. But actually she said, well, darling, we've got money in the budget to do it. So why are you complaining? And I was like, yes, dear, you're right. We have money in the budget. So, and again, many of these conversations, many arguments are caused because there's no plan. And then there's conflict over the use of God's resources. Thank you very much. And again, feel free, just as we're going through, if other questions come to you, then we can return back to them. Mark, we're going to be thinking about planning for the future. So let me hand over to you.
And maybe you can advance the slides, James. Yeah. So, so Kerry and Chanel, thanks a lot, because I think it provided a very good bridge to between you guys and Cyril, because I would like to talk a little bit about the future. And in some ways, we're going to talk about, how to budget a longer term future than just this year, and, how to handle the finances around that. And, I just want to give a big disclaimer here, because we have people from all over the world, all different tax and legal statuses in Switzerland, in France, in other countries. And things do differ according to your individual case. So what I'm going to do is give some ideas based on our, family experience. We live in Switzerland. We have 3 children. We own our own house. So, it's not going to be tailored on us. But ultimately, I think, these are a list of ideas, and I encourage you all to get proper, professional advice if you think this is interesting on whatever item you'd like to follow up on before jumping in. So let's maybe think about life events, first of all. So when we talked about budgeting, Kerry, you talked about, particularly this year. I want to encourage us all to think a little further than that. And, there are a number of stages. I gave a few examples of big life events, obviously, buying a first home for some people. If you have children, paying for school and university fees. I'll talk quite a bit about retirement. I think that this is something that at least I feel is kind of often not addressed enough as you think about, people getting older and living much longer after they effectively finish paid work, and what the consequences are of that. And then I'll make a couple of comments about end of life as well, particularly from a legal perspective in France and Switzerland. So all of these things have roughly the same principles, and I think you can move forward there, James. So, ultimately planning ahead counts, right? And, Chanel, you gave a great example of, a good surprise. In my experience, there's rarely good surprises. When it comes to planning ahead, they often turn out to be bad financial surprises. But I want to encourage us all to expect surprises, in both directions. Because often things, particularly when you look at the longer term, don't turn out quite as maybe you'd have planned originally. And, despite that, timing on at least a number of items is relatively certain, right? I mean, we don't know, any of us, how long we'll live on the earth, but we do know, if we have children, roughly when they're going to need to be educated at university. We know when, legally at least, we'd have to retire. And one thing I'd like us to think about is that if you invest $1 today, it's worth in 30 years at a 6% return a year, almost $6. And this is really critical when we think about long-term planning. So just think about that in terms of, putting $1 aside today, leaving it in, and I'll get to that, an investment for the next 30 years. And if you're 30, that would get you to retirement, I guess. That's worth almost 6 times as much at that point. And so I think that principle is really interesting as we start to look at these further ideas on the coming slides. So, just to bed that down a little bit, and John Cross shared this with me, working in a bank. I think it's interesting. There are many ways, and I'm not going to go in, and maybe Cyril, you're going to say more about investing. I'm not going to say so much about investing, but, when you start to think about the future, you have a choice, right? So you can save, as Carrie talked about, and have that in your budget, and you can leave that in cash under the bed, or you could invest in a bond, or you could invest in equities, or the stock exchange, as we call it. And I think this is an interesting chart where it shows what happened if you'd have looked at these different ways of investing between 2005 and 2023. It was the longest, it's 18 years, the longest period I could get John to provide me. But I just wanted to highlight the difference between, holding on to cash, having debt, which I haven't marked, but it's the line just above that, and then how the stock exchange has performed. In this case, just the US stock exchange of the S&P, I think it's the 500. And, as you see, the principle is that actually over time, if you're really talking about long-term investments, investing in shares, in equities, and not getting in and out of them, but really just staying with them, and I'll talk about how to do that, can, at least based on the last 18 years you see here, and if you take the stock exchange back to 1940, it's the same story, that it goes up and down, but on average, it goes up a lot more than cash. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. It's a very personal decision where you invest, because some investments have more risk than others. And obviously there's more risk to having, some money in stocks and shares than there is having cash, but ultimately, I think you see the returns over quite a long period of time. And if you pulled the same chart since 1940, you would see a roughly 6% return on equities, and obviously cash with inflation goes down over time. So just bear that in mind. Please, James. Yeah. So if you think about that, I know a number of you are, and Cyril, I don't want to go into this too much. I saw you'd mentioned that on one of your slides, but I think if possible, use hard currency, right? So I know a number of you are working, in African and other emerging market countries, sending money home to family, etc. I just wanted to make the point that the US dollar, for example, there are many more investment options. It's a much more stable currency over the long term, at least until now. I cannot predict the future, but at least until now, it's been much more stable than pretty much any other currency in the world. The Swiss franc is pretty stable too, but there are a lot less investment options. So I just wanted to boat that thought that, think about the euro, the Swiss franc, the US dollar. I think that they are good currencies, and maybe, for longer term savings, right? The other thing is that rather than saving, and investing a lump sum maybe on an annual basis, if you're able to save on a monthly basis and make that investment in a monthly basis, that smooths out the ups and downs of stock exchanges, the ups and downs of investments in the market. And so, over time, that reduces risk. So if you can at all do things on a monthly basis, that helps a lot, rather than on an annual or a quarterly basis. I'm just seeing a question here from Sam. Sorry. So let's come back to that at the end. Yeah. So thanks, Sam, for the question. These are kind of practical things from our family. So I'm sure there's going to be other perspective. That's fine. Then in terms of your savings, just make sure that you don't spend a lot in terms of fees to give to banks and to other financial organizations. I, at least personally, have also made mistakes around certain saving vehicles that have taken a lot of money in fees. And so actually, when you see companies that are trying to sell you investments that include life insurance and all kinds of other elements, I would just bode, a little bit of suspicion around that, and try to get to something, that are very, very low fees, that are very transparent, and the likes of Swissquote and Vanguard, etc., provide these kind of vehicles, and avoid you losing a lot of your savings in paying someone else. Okay, let's move forward. To retirement. So they may be amusing, maybe not amusing, but I actually, I don't think any of us would want to have somebody, get advice at 65 that they're not got much retirement, right? And it's really kind of a very, very important topic. We need to have the right amounts of savings to be able to take care of us in the non-working part at the end of our life. And so if you move forward, I had a few suggestions around that. I think if you, think about from your first job, trying to budget, to discipline yourself, even if there isn't a saving plan, to give a percentage. So typically right now, 5% is given by the employer and the employee. Employers normally provide very good schemes. If it's not the case, then why not think about doing that yourself? The advantage of having real retirement schemes are that they often have tax advantages in some countries, and you're able to avoid the tax that you actually invest into your pension until you draw that pension. And then there are special schemes, like in Switzerland, for example. There is a special in Geneva and Canton Vaud. There is a special scheme where you can invest up to 6,000 or 7,000 francs a year. That is an extra, what they call pilier, extra pillar of your pension. So there are ways and means to invest that are very efficient from a tax perspective. So I really encourage you to look at those and see, but ultimately to make sure that you start early in terms of saving small amounts on a monthly basis to pay for your retirement, just to make sure that you would have enough money and can do the things you would like to do at that point. Plus, similar applies to buying a home. For those that may want to buy a home, often you have to give a 20% deposit. That's a lot of money, at least it was for us. And I think planning ahead, that helps. So, if you're newly married and you plan to do something in a few years, then maybe that's an opportunity to save a little bit. Again, coming back to Carrie's idea and Chanel's idea on budgeting, just to think prayerfully about that. Don't forget notary fees. That is an element that, gets added to the property price you have to pay up front. And then again, there are some countries like Switzerland where you can renovate and deduct those against your taxes, right? So there are some interesting ways to reduce the cost of getting into properties, which seem to get more and more expensive. So again, the encouragement is to think about those things in advance and not wait until the moment before, because that's often quite a difficult moment to be able to make these kind of large lifetime planning moments. And similarly with education, for those of you that have British children, remember Brexit had quite some implications. Right now, the fees are still going to be honoured at European rates. For those that have younger children, it's not going to happen. So I know that for us, for example, the first one, it works, but thereafter, the two are going to become 3 times as much. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. Neil mentioned US university fees. We know they're extremely expensive. So those of you, I know the US people are often very good at saving for a long time for fees, because it's very prohibitive. And it's all the same principle as retirement, regular saving, trying to keep the fees down and trying to keep as much of that money for yourself. The difference here with education is you obviously need to be able to get to it at a certain moment in time. So it has to be a different vehicle to a pension. And finally, there's end of life, right? So I know there are different views on life insurance, but, some people like to take out life insurance at certain moments. It's something to think about, paying for, getting a lump sum at a certain point in life if you pass away early, so that your family are taken care of. Also, with regard to estate planning, money you may be leaving behind, taxes take a very big part of that unless it's been planned properly in advance. And at least where the majority of us live, in the French and Swiss parts of the world, the will is maybe not what you're used to. So in Anglo-Saxon, typically environments, that passes to the spouse that is left behind. In the case of Switzerland and France, that passes half to the spouse and then half to the children. And so if you want to have your estate go in a different direction, you need to get advice and make sure you'd have a will to lay that out. And I think that speeds things up at the point of end of life, and avoids lots of complications with legal if you've really kind of written that down and had it signed off in the right way. So I think in summary, we all trust in the Lord. What I'm encouraging us all is to think about long-term budgeting. You have kind of a life plan. There's going to be surprises, so the Lord will have different plans for you for what you think you have. But I think it's good to save if you can, and that thinking ahead is a good thing. And also thinking about when you're no longer on the earth, what is going to happen, and make sure that process is as simple as possible for your loved ones that you leave behind. I would encourage legally to sort that out in advance. So I guess that's very practical advice coming from my experience, and happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. Why don't we use this time to address some of these questions? Mark, you let me know if you want to tackle this one or the ones that are in the chat. So Sam raised a question about how does this square with the Bible saying, "Don't worry about tomorrow. Look at the sparrow, neither sows nor reaps, but the Father in heaven provides." Is this a lack of trust in God, this long-term planning?
Well, I let you answer that as the pastor. I'll give my perspective, which I think God gave us a good brain. I think actually by planning advance, I would say that it avoids us worrying too much about tomorrow. But that's my view is that he gave us opportunity to think this through. It definitely doesn't reduce in any way my trust in God, but I think it isn't just a different practical aspect in terms of that we have a means to do this is already a privilege, I'd say, given by God. But I'll let you add to that, James, in a more biblical manner.
Yeah, well, I think clearly one of the issues very much in those verses when Jesus talks about these things is worry. Do not worry about your life. Why do you worry about clothes? Do not worry about tomorrow. And then clearly there's this negative picture he paints simply about storing up. So I think a lot of these things that Mark has been talking about are things that we know will be coming. And so, for example, he talked about children and planning for them, or planning for retirement. So in my mind, this goes back to good stewardship. So if I get to when my children need to go to university and there's been no sense of planning, how is that showing love to my children? Or if I've been working on my life and haven't thought anything at all about retiring, how is that showing love to my spouse when I get to retirement? And so in my mind, it's a combination of stewardship, but also love, because actually I think there's far more worry that can take place when you get yourself into a situation where you haven't been coming before the Lord. You haven't been a good steward in that sense with the resources that you have. I think Betsy, you've just put do you want to say anything about that Bible verse you put in there, Betsy, in Proverbs 6 about the ant?
Oh, yeah, it says, maybe you can't see me because I'm already. Yeah, it's Proverbs 6:6-9. I think this is when I was going through my marriage counseling. Am I clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Maybe 17 years ago, Patrick and I had a lot of, the pastor who married us spoke a lot about finances, and I think we have held tight to those teachings. So I remember him talking about bands of the hair and also gathering your food during the winter time. So the verse, Proverbs 6:6-9 says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard," of course, if you're lazy, "consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at summer. How long will you lie there, you sluggard?" So it's a personal choice.
Cool. Let's see if there's any more questions in the chat. Where to go for advice in investing? Mark, any hints on there?
Yeah, where not to go, I think. So listen, I think there are. I think the big watch out on advice from investing is most people are trying to sell something. So I think the best advice would be that you know somebody personally. I think the banks are actually normally very good, I would say, for basic advice. I would avoid companies that are wrapping things up, that are advisors. They tend to have very high fees, the De Beers of this world, etc. But I would suggest you go to get advice either from the company you're working from when it comes to pensions. Typically those companies have outsourced, or the organizations like WHO have outsourced their pension provisions to an organization. And they typically, in my experience, give very good advice when it comes to retirement, which costs nothing. Then I think the second point of call would be, a high street bank, just realizing that, be suspicious of anything they're not prepared to show you fees on, because they are in the process of selling things. And I think ultimately beyond that, if you know somebody personally, I think that would be maybe the best person would be somebody who has good financial acumen and is able to give you free advice and has not got any interest in actually selling you something. I think that if you can separate the selling you something from the advice, I think this is helpful. And keep it simple. It's not so complex. Try to keep it simple.
Again, Cheryl has posed a similar question about finding financial advisors and how often should we meet with advisors?
Yeah, I think you should at least meet with them once a year, would be my suggestion. I think it depends a little bit what you're trying to achieve, but typically once or twice a year, if you're making regular savings, I would suggest. And then I gave my hierarchy in terms of financial advisors. I'd suggest that. I think, one thing I said on a slide is to avoid day trading. I don't think that almost anybody in the world, it's almost like credit cards, which also I really am with Kerry on this. Credit cards are an extremely expensive way to have money. So really, unless you have no other choice, please avoid credit cards. And similarly, everyone always makes a lot of noise when they manage to buy and sell a stock or a share, for example, because they made money, but they don't tell you the other 20 times when they lost money. So I would suggest to you that day trading is not a good way. You should just have a portfolio, probably just a tracker fund of a whole exchange at a very low cost, and just do it over many years on a standard basis, and avoid these kind of one-off stock pickings, because they are rarely successful. I mean, they really are. And even a Warren Buffett is probably the world's most experienced investor, still investing in 90 years old plus, would say go to a low-cost, stock exchange tracker. I mean, that would be his advice. And he's a man that's made lots of money out of stock picking. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, one more question on what do you mean avoid credit cards? You may want to just clarify the credit card versus debit card distinction.
Is the interest rates, as Carrie explained very well. The reason that the interest on a credit card costs so much is it typically is unsecured. So some of these credit cards, 20% plus a year, when actually borrowing money, for example, for your house is probably costing 3%. Right? That's the kind of, so the only debt I would suggest is worth having is one on maybe a property. I think when we talk about credit cards, it's actually where you don't pay it off every month, and where you end up effectively using that as a mechanism to borrow money to pay for something. And I think that's a very expensive way. And debit cards are when that comes directly out of your bank account. So at least in Switzerland, there's very few true credit cards. Most of the time it gets paid off at the end of the month. You pay your annual fee for the card and there's no other charges, which is fine. I think what we worry is when you start to pay this, very high interest rates on money that you haven't paid off at the end of the month.
Any books or resources for those?
We have to think about that one. I don't have anything straight to mind, but maybe I can do a little search and then we could send that out in the email afterwards, James.
Yeah, there's one which I've used before called oh, I'm seeing a bit of echo here, are called trustfund.net, which is, I'll send the link, but again, it's quite a useful resource in terms of just looking at historical stock market gains and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have recommendations, but it at least gives you a sense of historical growth rates. So, okay. Well, feel free for those. Thank you, Mark, so much for that. That's so helpful. And again, so we've looked a little bit at the short term, and Chanel, I forgot to say thank you for that wonderful testimony, because in my mind, your testimony about those flights, it's another example of how, you know, you lay your plans before the Lord, and then and he provides. And I meant to say that after your and Kerry's presentation, because I think it's another testimony of how even when you get unexpected bumps in the road, you can see his provision because you've recognized yourself as a steward of his resources. So thank you for sharing that testimony. Well, we're going to move on to our next presenter, Cyril from UBS Credit Suisse, and he is going to be giving you his top tips for managing money in Geneva. So Cyril, let me hand over to you, and you're welcome just to say next slide when you want me to move on.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Pastor James. So hi everyone, my name is Cyril Ndata. I currently work for Credit Suisse slash UBS. I mean, Credit Suisse moving to UBS, and I've been working there for almost 4 years now. Prior to that, I was working in private banking in Geneva. So I do have also a pretty good background in banking and the whole financial sector, especially in the Geneva area. And first of all, I wanted to say is we have to be aware of the fact that, I mean, Geneva is part of one of the top 10 most expensive city in the world. So because of that, whenever I think when we speak about finance in Geneva, even in terms of spending, is really, really critical to be aware of different things. So here I'm just, you know, trying to be a little bit practical, providing you guys 5 tips, which I think gather the most of how to adjust a little bit, also adding to what my other colleagues have spoke about, Mark and Kerry, regarding the whole budgeting, you know, finance and all of that. So for me, one of the first thing, especially with Switzerland, is the currency exchange, which for me is something that is really, 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 really important. It's something really, really key. For a lot of the newcomers, when they come to Switzerland, I mean, you know, when we go at any store or anything that we have to pay, it's always in Swiss franc. 10 Swiss franc, 100 Swiss franc, what does that mean? So we sort of need to have some type of reference to another currency. I mean, I think, and something that I realize is almost most of the members of Crossroads are mostly foreigner. So when we come from another country which have a different currency compared to the Swiss franc, most of them have a lot of surprise, especially with the fact that Geneva is one of the top 10 most expensive city. So it's really, really important to be aware of just the currency exchange. And here I've put you just a graph of what's the currency rate at the moment and where we came from. I mean, this is just the last 10 years. Over the last 10 years, the Swiss franc rise by almost 27% compared to the euro, of course. I mean, I'll compare with the euro because, I mean, currently I live in France, but yeah, I do work in Switzerland. So just with this graph, just tell me that, for instance, if I was paying a house 10 years ago in euro, based on my Swiss revenue, at the moment, I will be paying 25% less. This is no matter, I mean, we're just talking about the currency value, not talking about the price or what the house is worth, simply in terms of pure currency. So just playing the currency game, and that's the message of this graph, is saying that just playing the currency game help us to make some savings, such as, and this will come to then my next slide, which is understand that for different things that make up our day-to-day, such as buying basic goods, health insurance, transport, accommodation, all those different things definitely always turn around currency, especially if you live on the French side and you work in Geneva, or maybe you also work and live in Geneva, and you also have to be aware that just near the border on the French side, you can definitely make some savings by choosing where to get some of those products. Such as, for the grocery, like with my wife, something that we do is we do have some of the product that we like. For instance, the trash bag, we like to buy them at La Micro, à la Coop. They're cheaper than buying them in Carrefour, for instance. We find them more efficient, they're more strong, and of course, they're cheaper. Things like, I don't know, beauty lotion or like soap. We like to buy them at La Micro, à la Coop. They're better quality and cheaper compared to buy them in France. So even though Geneva is a very expensive city, there's still a bit of comparison in terms of product that you always have to do. And I would say, unfortunately, it's part of the game. There's something that you have to do. You always have to kind of compare and get used to some of those products. Same thing with the insurance, health insurance, car insurance. What are the different products they're offering you? If you have the choice and you are capable of choosing between both. Previously, I was working in Zurich, and I realized that living and working in Zurich, I never had to do this kind of. I never had to have this kind of thinking like, what's the price? Whenever I was going to the store, I was just paying the price that was listed. But being here on the French side compared to Geneva, it definitely matters to be aware of, hey, I should always do a bit of comparison. That's not us being cheap or whatever, no, that's just us being smart. And I think making a little bit of comparison before buying, is the smart way to do this. And this would then take us to my next slide, which is, also as a newcomer or being around here for a moment, you always have to do, so that's a little exercise I like to do always at the end of the year. Like I would try to compare, let's say, that's one of the reasons why also all those banks has to provide you a statement, compare the different fees that you pay and see a little bit some of the condition, ask questions and trying to see where could be ways for you to make some savings. So it's really, really important and critical to choose the bank account also according to your lifestyle. This is very, very, very important. If in terms of lifestyle, I don't know, you're shopping more in France compared to Switzerland, maybe you might want to ask your Swiss bank if it is possible for you to open a Euro account. Like that, you will definitely save in terms of currency exchange instead of always having to pay for fees, of exchange rate fees every time that you're purchasing something on the other side of the border, And same thing also apply for someone living on the French side, but shopping most of the time in Switzerland. Yeah, you can also have, and I think there's those banks that I've listed here. I think are pretty much the one that we found in the different cities that bordered Geneva, and most of them offer bank accounting on CHF and Euro account, if I'm not mistaken. And same thing. Like Mark was speaking earlier regarding like buying a house. Yeah, for everything regarding interest rate, loan rate, even credit card, the advantage you will get from the credit card, even your debit, what are the fees, the monthly fees that you're paying. I remember, wow, at the very beginning, I used to have one of those Société Générale card, and I don't recall again what was the monthly fees I was having, but I think it was pretty expensive. At the moment, I'm using Wise, like Pastor James mentioned. It's a very straightforward card with, I think it has, if I'm not mistaken, TransferWise has no fees, but the Revolut, which is one of the competitor of TransferWise, has some fees, and I'm using them for my kids also. Yeah, they do have a kids account, which is easily managed with an application, web application. And also another thing, is also when it comes the tax period, is to be aware of what are the different tax breaks that you can have. For that, for me, I mean, no matter how to say, even if you're a homeowner or not, it's always good, maybe to contact a fiduciary. I've used some of those services in Geneva, and I think, it definitely makes sense, because as we know, I mean, we always pay a lot of tax. We always complain that we're paying a lot of tax. So whenever there's a tax breaks or a little advantage that we have access, those are all the legal means that the government is putting at our disposal to use. So I will definitely make use of them. So that's also another good tips here on how to save a bit of money. And if we go to the next slide, the next one is also here to take advantage of some of the free and low-cost activity. There's plenty of them in Geneva, and also on the French side, I'm more aware of those that are in Geneva. If I would say, I would propose you guys, if any one of you has some additional free one available, but on the French side, if you can add them to the chat, we will definitely add to a list that can be shared among us. So yeah, taking advantage of some of those free activities, you know, as a family or even just with your spouse or with some friends, always good, you know. There's no, I mean, we should never, I would say, saving a bit of money is never free. So all savings are good. Yeah, pretty much. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, and those are some great places to visit, to hang out with families and friends, and I'll definitely recommend those. The next, and I think for me is definitely when we first moved in Geneva, that was back in 2007. We definitely used this networking. A way to manage and to save money, I would say, in the surrounding of Geneva is by networking. Yeah. Through groups like Facebook, these different groups of people, you know, providing tips on advice, or, you know, the mouth to mouth, or even your local community, or even at Crossroads, you know. When we first moved here, sometimes we used to ask some of our friends, hey, how do you do this for your kids? Which insurance do you use? You know, it's always good to have a bit of experience for somebody else who already been through the same issue that you might face. And for you, you know, to take it and to make your comparison. I would say, because we all have each our stories and our needs are definitely different. So it's always good to compare to what the others are doing. But definitely on most of those social networking sites, yeah, they do advertise for a lot of things. And pretty much a lot of my, I would say, what if I want to buy even some toys or whatever, I always one of my first reaction is always to go on one of those Facebook marketplace and see, hey, do I find somebody that's maybe selling something? Because sometimes some people are buying things that finally they end up realizing that they're not using much, and those are pretty much brand new stuff that we can definitely use, and we definitely save a lot by, you know, getting those. So I have saved a lot, yeah, doing that. It's not the question of you don't have money, but it's just that, yeah, I think this is spending money wisely. And like that, you know, we also have not to waste, you know, things or throw things away. So those were just, I think for me, the main, without going too much into the whole technical part, those were for me, I would definitely say the tips we can use, especially around Geneva. And I thank you guys for your presence and for your attention. Thank you, Pastor James.
Bless you, Cyril. Let's just see if there's any specific questions on these 5 points. And Cyril, thank you so much again for that graph of the Swiss franc to euro was pretty amazing. I hadn't realized the 25% swing. So
is there anyone in Switzerland that could answer Elia and Sarah's?
I think Elia and Sarah, do you still have any more specific question around the tax breaks area? Would you like Cyril to give any more info on that?
They live in Switzerland.
We do know about the taxes documents that you file, and then they can correct and give you something back. It was just if it included something else, I think. But those things we know. Thank you, Jane.
Cyril, any other? I know tax isn't your specialty, but any other tax break hints from your own experience
In Geneva.
in Geneva?
I mean, from my own experience, you know, especially most of us working in Geneva. I mean, in Switzerland, you do have your third pillar that you can. I mean, whatever you put on your third pillar, you definitely deduct those from taxes. But there's a limit on how much you can put on those. But as I say, those are really, really technical questions. And I think you just said at the beginning of the year like this, There's different and a lot of those company fiduciary around the whole Geneva that you can contact. They can do a consultation, I think, for like 50 Swiss francs, but definitely they can list you a whole bunch of different things that you can definitely adapt, and those can definitely be used to save some money. So I would say, yeah, it's good to always do this kind of check, especially at the beginning of the year. Yes. If we intend, let's say this year, if you intend to have a surgery, if you intend to renovate or to make any changes, like you're going to change a car or something, I'm sure there's always something that you can deduct if it's for professional reason or private reason. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it definitely makes sense. Like I think in also having a health insurance in Switzerland, there's this period where you can change your health insurance, and there's always also this question of, should I increase maybe my franchise or should I lower it? And I would say it's definitely based on, do you plan having any major surgery or any major, I mean, of course, we don't plan to have any health issue, but sometimes there might be some surgical operation or something that we might have in mind somehow that we can a bit plan, and for those, we will definitely maybe choose the better insurance coverage based on that. So I would definitely say, please do take that little time around the end of the year to think about some of those different adjustments we can do.
Great. I think Ellie and Sarah have raised their hands, so let me just see if they want to pose a follow-up question on that.
Sorry, guys, just for painful experience, because my franchise in of health was 2,500, which is the maximum. But just for let you know, like, because some of you know that I had a surgery and I had to be in hospital for 5 days in HUG was like 8,000 Swiss francs. So, planning around that, it's really important, I think, to there are a lot of things that you cannot expect. So, to be moderate, that you don't go too low or not too high. But I would have saved some money if I would have chose 1,000 franchise instead of 250.
No, thanks, Elia, for sharing that. And again, if anyone is wanting to look at possible changes in health insurance, we've got a believer in Crossroads who actually specializes in health insurance, and so may be able to help if people are looking at specific questions around maybe changing their health insurance. So they're welcome to have a chat with me, and I'm happy to send them, connect them together. So thanks, Elia. Any more questions for Cyril? Okay, I only noticed recently that I could have a Euro account with my Swiss bank. Can you explain more about how I'd actually use that account? Does it mean having a different debit card? Cyril, how does it work? A Euro and a Swiss account, does that mean it's one card, two cards? Is that a bank specific question?
Yeah, I mean, like for I bank with Ferney, CIC, sorry. With them, I have a Euro card and a CHF card. I think the CHF is a red card and the Euro is a blue card. So whenever I'm in Switzerland, I will definitely use the CHF card so that everything that I'm spending is directly debit in CHF and I don't have to pay any exchange fee. So when I go in my online banking, I do have, those two accounts. But what is good with that is just the simple fact that I have only one advisor in front. So when I speak to her, she has access to both my CHF and my French and my Euro account, instead of having just one bank where I have my Euro account and one in Switzerland where I have my CHF account. And of course, with that only one bank, I can also get my salary on the CHF and I can transfer or convert it into my, basically.
Great. I see Emmanuel has got a question as well. So Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you very much, Pastor James, and thanks, Cyril, for the very informative presentation. I did actually put my question in the chat, but let me just ask quickly that he mentioned the WISE cards.
Yes.
Maybe you might just want to expand how it works. And then also if, like Pastor James said, the comparison of the Euro against the CHF is quite informative. How has the dollar done against the CHF in the same period? I mean, if you do have the statistics as well. And then finally, the other question is to the earlier presenter, forget my name, not Kerry. Related, I know there was some heads up about some of the investments to consider, and one of the red flags I remember was DVA. Any personal experience anyone may have had to be good to hear. Thanks, and over.
Cyril, any
Okay.
questions? You may not be able to answer the question off the bat, the US dollar to Swiss. I'm sure a Google search could probably address that one.
No, I haven't. I mean, over the past 10 years, I mean, and as we know that at the moment, the US is definitely not doing pretty good compared to the CHF, which has always been either stable or getting stronger. I mean, over the past 10 years, and it's been a bit of up and down, the US compared to the CHF is at -3%, which is not a lot. It's almost like they have always almost been aligned, both of them. So there's not big variation for me per se. Whereas definitely between the CHF and the euro, I mean, and we definitely see how much the Swiss National Bank is fighting hard to maintain the CHF not to explode. If not, I'm pretty sure that the CHF, and let's see, because as we know, the Eurozone is not the best place compared to the CHF. The CHF is always getting stronger, so I can pretty much, I think with, I would say, a bit of certainty that over the next 10 years, the CHF will again grow even further compared to the euro.
And Emmanuel, I think your second question was to Mark. Mark, I don't know if you're still there to able to address Emmanuel's second question.
Yeah, and then some light on around the WISE cards, how that works. That's to serve.
Let's go for the WISE cards first, and then we'll come back to your.
Okay, so pretty much WISE. I mean, before it used to be called TransferWise. There's they have another competitor called Revolut. Revolut, I think they operate out of London, whereas TransferWise operate out of Germany. So it's a Europe. So with basically, you go online, you sign up. I think they will ask you for your piece of identification, and then they will ask you to pay like a minimum fee, I think, of €5 or €10, so that they will send you your. It's not a prepaid card, but it's a card that is a chargeable card, a card that you can charge, you can load it. And to charge the card, you can use another card to put some money on that card, or you can do wire directly from your bank account directly to a WISE account. But what is really good with WISE is the fact that they do have some pretty low exchange rate fees, meaning from that WISE card, you have access to different currency. You can have access to a euro account, a pound account, a US dollar, or I mean, whatever currency. I think they support about like 30 to 37 different currencies. And basically, directly from the application, you can do your exchange. And especially, I was using the WISE card when I was traveling abroad. I went to a couple of times, I mean, several times to Asia, and I could use directly from the application the Thai baht, go at the ATM and get some cash directly with that card. And it does have a lot of different functionality, like you can temporarily block the card, you can generate some virtual card that you can only use online for one specific transaction. Like that, you don't have to manually, I mean, you don't have to save your card number on all those different websites. So those are some pretty cool thing brought by the fintech, as we call it. And I think regular bank like Credit Suisse or UBS are even looking to adapt some of those technology that was brought us by those new online bank like Wise or Revolut.
Great. And Emmanuel, I think you had there was one last part of your question, is that right, which was to Mark?
That's right, Pastor James. Thank you.
Mark, I don't know if you caught that question.
I didn't catch the question. Emmanuel, could you repeat it for me, please?
Yeah, I think it was. Thank you very much, Mark, for that insightful presentation. I think it was around some of the investments to avoid, and I did hear you flag the VIA, for example. So just thinking if you would want to throw some light, if there's been any personal experience around that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm a De Beer investor, so I know that they're very, very active in the international community, right? So I don't think it's a dishonest organization. I think there are a number of organizations like this. They're probably the biggest. My personal experience is that their fee levels are very high and they're very untransparent in the way that they demonstrate that. So whilst you'll be investing in very solid funds, I don't think that's the issue. It's not dishonest, as I said, it's very honest. But they will make a case that they have sort of legal wrappers against tax and et cetera, and that these, every time you add one of those, it adds a percentage that you need to pay in fees, which they're not very transparent about. And so my point would be, Emmanuel, that I think in the last years, things have moved on in the sense of there are many more vehicles to invest now than there were like even 10 years ago. And I think Cyril in the bank probably knows that, right? And so I would suggest that unless you are a very sophisticated investor, you just go to these, tracker and ETF funds that are hosted by like Swissquote and others, because their fees are at kind of 0.3, 0.5%, because there's no active management. And they've been proven to be doing just as well over a long period than actually better than stock picks. But I would, my specific point on De Beer and other organizations like them is they try to make the case for kind of tax wrappers that cost you a lot of money, and probably you don't need it. And so get some independent advice, but don't take what they say for granted, and make sure that they provide you transparently what the fees are. And if that's not possible, that probably means that there are a lot and you shouldn't be doing it. So I would suggest, Cyril, maybe you have other experience at the bank. These independent organizations typically take quite a bit of money. That's my concern, Emmanuel, so fees.
I wanted maybe to add like a comment. I don't know, Pastor James, if you can bring back one of the slides from Mark, the one regarding between the cash and
this one here.
Yeah, this one here. One thing that's very, very interesting is the fact that, I mean, as a human being, we are always very factual, meaning when we hold cash on hand, we see cash. So over the past, 30 years, if you have had, $10,000 in terms of cash, that $10,000 value will have grown to whatever you can purchase right now with the $10,000. Whereas with the whole stock market, as we can see, those ups and downs are emotion. The problem is for us, in terms of emotion, when the market goes down, the first reaction is always, I'm losing money, is to sell. And when the market is going up, the market is going up, I need to buy. So when we buy, we never go how high it will go, or when it goes down, we never know how down it will go. But as we can see over the past 30 years, the market always recovers itself. And that's the key message is even when we invest, we should always look at the long-term investment. An investment, as Mark was mentioning before, the day-to-day, no, definitely. I don't think us as human beings were made for the day-to-day trading. Investment only makes sense when we look at it on the long term. It's just like buying a house. We don't buy a house to sell it the next day. No, it's always over the long term. So we should take the investment just like the way we're thinking when we buy a house. Okay, I'm buying my house now, maybe I might sell it in 10 years, making some profit on it. It should not be something that, I'm investing now because I'm going to make money next day or in 2 years, or no. We should always look at the very, very long term. And of course, as we see, every time that the longer is the period that we kept it, the more, also I think if we add the whole compound interest to it, especially to the market, it definitely makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Cyril.
Maybe I can just answer Sherelle's question as well.
Yeah, please do.
Just quickly. So I think, Sherelle, you should get some independent advice, but my gut reaction would be that you should just stay in US dollars. There are many more options in US dollars to invest. You're going to need US dollars when you go home. You're paid in US dollars. I would not take the currency risk. So I would suggest, just keep in US dollar and you're going to be fine. It's been proven over many decades that the US dollar is probably the hard currency. of the world if it really comes to it. And so I would stick with that and avoid, because understanding that every time you switch into another currency, you take a charge because somebody needs to do that for you, and it's not insignificant. So just invest in US dollars, keep the fees down, and invest for the long term, as Cyril also just emphasized.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. This is really great advice. I'm loving this. Well, we want to make sure we move on to our final presenter. So let me roll on to our senior pastor, because we've talked a lot about figures and finance, but actually at the heart of this is faith and finance. So let me hand over to Pastor Neil, who's going to close us off with this section. And I'm watching the numbers, and we're at 36, and I'm praying we stay at 36 because this is a vital topic. So Pastor Neil, let me hand over to you. If he's still there. Let me check. Well, it looks like he may have slipped off the line.
No, I was.
Oh, there you are.
Thanks, Pastor James. This has been an incredible time, and so thank you for everybody sharing. It's been insightful. I just love listening. I'm like Pastor James. I love listening to this. It's tremendously important that as Christians that we move through this world both with, like we like to say, Mark earlier, about wisdom. God comes to renew our minds, not to remove them. And so we need renewed minds, and to do the very best that we can as we travel through this world. And I just loved tonight. There's also an aspect, though, on the faith side. I remember when I was first a Christian, and I decided my car wasn't working well. So I thought, well, I'm not going to pay my tithes. And so I didn't pay tithes because I needed that money to pay for my car. And so I got the car fixed, and it came to exactly the amount of the tithe. And it was like the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm going to take, if you choose not to pay your tithe, I'm going to take it somewhere else. And it was just like a lesson to me. So we've always paid our tithes, always paid our tithes. Now, when it comes to church, I like what Chanel and Kerry had mentioned. You got these surprises that come along. And I want to just focus on that in a church, we don't have a product that we are selling. And so we rely on the people's giving to maintain the place where we worship, to maintain some of the things that we are doing as a church body. And so sometimes we inadvertently carry these things. And so in a church, you are going to have at different times what, Chanel said, surprises that suddenly come up. And when these surprises come up, generally it's going to be a request for you to give. And so we have, for instance, we have a church that we are remodeling. We're not remodeling it, it's being built right now. And so we need to cross the finish line to see this get done. So the key is going to be to come and ask the congregation to give and maybe reach some finances outside of Crossroads itself. So it brings us down then to this point on faith and finance, because there's going to be times that there's going to be a call to do more than maybe what you are able to do or even have in the bank. And so how does faith work with my finances? Is there a place for this? Well, first slide is, in Hebrews 11:6, it says, without faith it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And which brings me to my very first point. Go to the next slide, please, Pastor James. The next slide is, so when giving by faith, it's to prayerfully seek God what you should give. And so the scriptures say in Corinthians, each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. For I testify that they gave as much as that they were able. So when you see these two scriptures, each man should give what he has decided to give in his heart. So, but how do we know that? through prayer. So whenever there comes a call to a congregation, we need to cross the finish line for a building, or we need to cross the finish line to do a project to the poor, or something like this, where we are calling on the congregation to give. You need to do this by prayer, because in 2 Corinthians 8 it says, I testify that they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded us for the privilege of giving. So there's this opportunity that you need to know in your heart when you take it to the Lord in prayer, how much that you actually can give to the body of Christ. Number two, the next slide, please, Pastor James. So giving by faith, you need to know God's incredible grace. In other words, he's going to give you the grace to believe him, to go beyond when there comes a call. Sometimes it's real easy to get caught up in the moment when we put out a call to say we need people we need to raise X amount of euros or francs for this project, and we can get caught up in that and say, well, I can give this much, but we haven't prayed. And it's not by faith, but it comes now out of the heat of the moment. And as pastors, we want to make sure that you always are doing what God has called you to do. That's what we want. Rather than more money, we want to see more prayer. We want you to know the incredible grace that if you do commit to a project from the church, that God, because you have prayed and he's put something in your heart to do, he's going to give you the grace to walk that out and to believe it. And I believe this with all my heart, as Chanel mentioned, is that God knows different ways how to compensate when you've maybe taken some money that was going to go in a certain direction, and then you by faith give it to the work of the Lord. God knows how to come in different ways, plane ticket here, a different outworking on something else. God knows how to do that, and that's by giving and knowing God's incredible grace. The next one, please, Pastor James. So giving by faith means not being swayed by sight. In 2 Corinthians 8:2, out of the most severe trial, the overflowing joy and the extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. And then this one in 9:8, it says, God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that you, having all sufficiency in everything, may have an abundance for every good deed. And so God does want to bless you on the job. He does want to make sure that you and your family get good work. And we do pray for open doors and for increases in, where you work and promotions, etc., because he will do that for you for the purpose that you are able to participate. But now, why I put this number 3 in here is because out of the most severe trial, sometimes when we're going through difficulties, sometimes when we're going through some extreme hard times, the tendency, just like Cyril was saying, is that or somebody was saying, maybe it was Emmanuel, that when you want to buy when it's high and you want to sell when it's low, when it should be the opposite way. You should be giving when times are difficult. And we found this in our life many times, is that when we just haven't had it, but when we've gone to prayer, the Lord has put something on our heart to do, and we say, God, it's just so difficult. This is such a hard time. And but we both have felt on our hearts for a certain figure, and we've done it. And God has supernaturally found a way to bless us. Now, I am not a faith preacher in the sense that give 100, you're going to get 1,000 back from God. I'd love to do that, but that is be unconscionable for me, because I think that there's a better way, is to say, God, show us. So even in the midst of a trial or extreme difficulties, you might think, I don't have it to give. But don't be swayed by sight, because if you pray and God gives you the grace, he'll be able to cause you to be generous in very difficult times. And I'm talking by faith, not just for church items, but for you as an individual. Faith is going to be one of the most crucial things in the days to come, is that you can believe God that he's going to get you through some difficult days. Okay, next and the last slide, then I'll close up. Giving by faith is to believe God will supply the seed that you need. And I think I've covered quite a bit of that right now. But now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge your harvest of your righteousness. You will be made rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. So whether you know this or not, but as you participate in Crossroads church life, we're praying for you. We are praying that God will do super abundantly in and through your time while you're here. And we know that people have got commitments back home, commitments here, a high cost city that you're living in. And this is why we wanted to do this. But in the midst of this, we have a church right in the heart of Geneva that needs you. And we need the giving that people can give to the church. And we say, well, we're not sure that we've got it. But this is where faith comes in, that God will supply that amount. And, you know, there's lots of little testimonies that come up. Just recently, I took a speaking engagement and they gave me a certain amount from that speaking engagement. And my wife and I had prayed, we're going to the States tomorrow for a week, and we'll be back again. And we needed somebody to look after our little dog. Now, we love this little guy. He's part of the family. And we just didn't have the extra cash to do this. And we didn't know where it was going to come from, because we wanted to give a little gift to this person, and we had a certain amount on it. And so we did that. And we wanted to do that. And suddenly this speaking opportunity came up, and it was the exact amount that we wanted to give. And so it's like, God, we wanted to do this, but we didn't have that seed, but you supplied it in a way that was as natural as anything. And so I want to encourage us as a church that there are going to be times that there's going to be a call on the church to come forward with a gift for some of the things that we are doing. And we do not ever want you to feel pressured and feel that we are putting, you know, the screws down on you. But we do want you to live a life of faith, so that when he speaks, you can trust him to, and this last verse here, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you, through his poverty, might become rich. So we know if he did it for us, even when he was poor, he actually bought the world back to himself through his poverty on the cross. Then he's giving us the faith to believe that even in our difficult times, we are able to participate in the life of a church that's giving us a wealth to live by, to worship by, and to have fellowship by. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Neil, for that encouragement, because without faith, all of this is pointless. Any questions at all for Pastor Neil on any of those things before we close up tonight? Going once? Going twice? The balloons say that it's all gone. So I'm going to hand over to Cyril to close us in prayer. And I just want to thank everyone for all the questions they've raised, and for Kerry and Chanel and Mark and Cyril having invested the time in this session. Cyril, if you could close us in prayer, please, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Cool.
All right, guys, let us pray. Thank you, God. Thank you, my Lord. We want to thank you for this wonderful Sunday you have allowed us to share We want to thank you for all the people that were here, for the teaching, for the listening, for the sharing. Our God, please, as we're coming down to the end of this year, we want to pray you. We want to thank you for all you have accomplished. And please, we're just asking you to provide for all our needs. We ask you to come and help to those that are in need. And please, your holy name, your Holy Spirit, be with us each and every day. We have prayed in the name of Jesus, and we thank you. Thanks.